And so the coaching search seems to be down to two. That's at least the names that I continue to see out there are one Lane Kiffin and one Hugh Freeze. What's your thought? What's your preference? Where do you stand?
Oh, preference is such a convoluted thing. I'll talk about what we're all just think we know about this situation, right? It's Lane Kiffin's job, in my mind, to turn down at this point. You know, the reports are that he's had an extension on his desk from Ole Miss that he hasn't signed yet. There's reports that his agent, Jimmy Sexton, has an offer from Auburn in hand, and Lane has yet to see that. Whether that's exactly true or not, I cannot corroborate that. But just given the timeline of some things, I think that's really what's going on here. So I think it is a clear Lane Kiffin. If you want it, come get it. And I don't know why you wouldn't if I'm Lane Kiffin. That can probably be a bigger conversation in and of itself. But Hugh Freeze is the next guy up, the guy who seems to probably want the job more. I just think there's probably there's baggage that comes with both candidates. And that's another big conversation too. But I think obviously he's going to be the guy that gets it after that point. It really, honestly, if we get to Sunday and somebody hasn't been hired, that means Lane probably didn't want it and they didn't feel comfortable enough to bring Hugh into the fold, so to speak. So at that point, I think we're almost back to square one and not necessarily restarting the search, but really reevaluating some of the candidates. And I know this seems really far-fetched, but you might even see Cadillac get a really hard look at that point. Not saying that that's going to get to that point, because my gut tells me it will be Lane Kiffin. But, you know, I've seen stranger things happen. I always say if somebody can run back 109 yards on a field goal for a touchdown to win the Iron Bowl, anything's possible. Preference-wise, I think Lane Kiffin checks the boxes in a lot of areas that other candidates that we've mentioned throughout this coaching search. Maybe not to the level that some tick a certain box, but he kind of at least gets you what that other candidate would bring to the table. So if you ask me and really press me on preference, I'm going to say Lane Kiffin. It's not that I'm not enthusiastic about it or not enthusiastic. I'm just trying to really look at it from a logic standpoint at where I'm at right now.
Kyle, this is the question I've been asked all week by fans that root for other teams, whether inside or outside the SEC. Is Auburn really a better job than Ole Miss? I'm going to give you my take, and then certainly your more educated take is coming. And slightly biased take, but still more educated than mine. But mine would be this. I was there firsthand covering Ole Miss and the SEC in 1998 when Tommy Tuberville left Ole Miss to go to Auburn. So I was covering Tommy Tuberville, Jackie Sherrill, Gene Stallings on a daily basis at that point, or Mike Dubose, I guess it would have been on a daily basis at that point. And actually, that was the first of what we see every year in the Egg Bowl playing on Thanksgiving. It was the first of those, and Tommy Tuberville left town that night and took the Auburn job. And there was no thought outside of the Ole Miss camp that was a better job. You take the Auburn job over the Ole Miss job 24 years ago. There's no question. Now we move ahead 24 years to 2022, and we see we still see what is achievable at Auburn, winning a national championship in 2010, getting within 7 seconds of another one 3 years later, and we've not seen Ole Miss do anything close to that. So I understand that part of it. We also see that the winning percentages for the two programs have roughly been the same, I would say, in the last 5 to 8 years. I don't have firsthand knowledge to know what resources would be given to a head coach at Auburn versus Ole Miss in regards to hiring and employing a staff, recruiting budgets, that sort of thing, in addition to what's being paid to the head coach. But looking at the surface of the resources, the expectations, and where these programs have been playing over the last 5 to 10 years, I would say, well, if you're at Auburn, some people have called this, and I'm sure you've heard this before, one of the more difficult coaching jobs, if not the most difficult coaching job in America, not because you don't have the ability to win, but because of the measuring sticks being Georgia and Alabama versus Ole Miss. Beat Mississippi State, win 8 games, and we're happy. And you may have similar resources, again, I don't know for sure, and similar ties to recruiting that you have at Auburn. So Auburn, Ole Miss, how do you weigh those two jobs?
I think it's a great question. It's a very big question that you're probably not going to be able, I'm not even going to be able to answer fully. And I like that you said back at the Tommy Tuberville time, there was no question. And I think it's fair to say that that gap that was there has closed some, but I don't think it is closed as much as people think outside looking in. For me, I even asked an Ole Miss fan recently that I did a podcast with. I just honestly said, do you guys see yourself, and I don't mean this rudely, as the inferior program still? And he said, I don't view us as inferior, but if I was in his situation talking about Lane, I would take the Auburn job in a heartbeat. And that's a guy with firsthand knowledge of the program and how things are going and things like that. So I put a lot of stock in that. Not every fan or analyst that's connected with Ole Miss is going to say that, but that really kind of opened my eyes to say, it's not just me with my orange and blue glasses looking at this. They see it too still, if they're being really honest with themselves. Auburn just opened up a state-of-the-art $92 million, I think, football-only facility that I personally had a chance to walk through, not just the public section, but back with the rest of the media to see the team meeting rooms, walk through some of the office hallways, back behind into the locker rooms. And it's outstanding. State-of-the-art, one of its kind. It's going to be hard for people to play catch-up at this point. Auburn has done an outstanding job of that. That's a selling point in and of itself. But I think if you want to really sell Auburn, all you do need to point to is the stands at Ole Miss that don't get filled up on even a big game until halftime. And in a 3-6 football team that had very little chance at that time of continuing forward in a productive way this season, and the stadium sold out for Cadillac Williams. Now, there's a lot of emotion involved with that, and I understand that. I'm not just saying that's the only reason. But that, to me, that's something that you should want to be a part of. A fan base that if you give them a reason to support you, they will do it wholeheartedly, and even if you're 3-6 out in the field, because they love this school and this team. When you talk about budgets and things like that, it's probably that gap's a lot closer. I don't have specific figures to quote you, but it seems to me the rate at which we got our NIL program up to very quickly, I think that we're probably in a more financially sound state to obviously run a program, but to provide that new NIL assistance that is becoming ever so more confusing in today's college football world. But I could go into a bunch of other reasons, history and things like that. The gap has closed, but it's still Auburn in my mind.
Yeah, Ole Miss is a nice program, great tradition, and so forth. But when the results can be achieved by multiple coaches as well, that also points for me to, okay, this is more about the resources, the culture, the administration, the school, everything involved, and not just one coach was able to work magic somewhere. And so 2004, 2010, 2013, 2017, 3 different coaches, okay, they can play at the highest level when everything is working.
Yes.
And Ole Miss hasn't been there since the early 60s. Why is it the greatest rivalry in not only college football, but all of sports?
That's a great question. And it's actually one that I've had with several people. And I used to describe it in this way. And the first example I'm going to use is probably not as potent anymore because that rivalry has died off just a little bit in terms of its interest level. I used to describe it this way. The Notre Dame USC traditional rivalry was great, but they're across the country from each other. So they rarely get a chance to interact that much. Michigan, Ohio State is probably the next one I would describe as the greatest rivalry in college football, and can be an argument for sports as well. They're cross-state, so very close proximity to each other. In Auburn, in Alabama's case, you're stuck with each other, especially if you live in the state, 24/7, 365 days a year. It never ends. The bragging rights, there's no break from it. When we won 6 in a row, it was just nonstop. Honk if you sack Brody, all the other slogans that you want to throw out there from that. And then obviously with Nick Saban's era, it's just continued on their end. It is a nonstop, never ending reminder of across the state what's going on, the success or failure, depending on which side you find on the rivalry. To me, it's deeper than football. It's, families are divided over this thing. Marriages are divided over this thing. It is just, for me, the greatest rivalry in all of college football and probably sports.
When Alabama and Auburn's brought up, I convey this story, and I covered the rivalry firsthand for 6 to 7 years when I was working the SEC, and so I've been to Alabama Auburn games. But I convey this story. I was taking a trip from Ohio back to Mississippi. This was in the middle of the summer. It may have been May, may have been June, and I was just searching around for sports radio, sports talk. And some place in Tennessee, I was able to come across some, and it was coming from the state of Alabama. And they were debating and arguing Alabama and Auburn football and the rivalry in the middle of May.
Yeah. Not a shock, not a surprise in any way that that's happening in other states. Not a shock that, just think about it. The kick six in and of itself, that is still, at least in the modern era, the greatest college football play that's probably happened. That you can go back in history and find some others and have a good debate about that. But I was at that game. I stormed the field. I was in the student section when I shouldn't have been in the student section. I won't go into details about that. But just the electricity that surrounds that game, whether you are there on campus in Tuscaloosa or in Auburn, but even if you're not there, this is just a rivalry that captivates everybody because of the history. It's Bear Bryant, it's Shug Jordan, it's Gene Stallings, Pat Dye, Tommy Tuberville, Nick Saban, Bo Jackson, Kenny State. We can just name the names. It is something that encompasses the state of Alabama, the Southeast, and college football, frankly.
Let's just focus on the game briefly because there are other matters at hand, but there is a game to be played, and there's a lot of pride on the line, even if there is not a championship on the line. So Auburn travels to Alabama. The Tigers are roughly a 3-touchdown underdog. Is there any reason to have hope in this one?
You always have hope, right? You really try to come into this game and understand that schedules, records, other storylines that happen throughout the year, you throw them out for this game. I saw it happen last year in person. There was no way Auburn should have been in the game with Alabama, and yet it took overtime and a miracle 50-yard backup kicker nailing a 50-yard field goal to keep Auburn in this game and almost, have an opportunity to win it. You just throw these things out. Now, but let's talk about reality. Auburn is going through a coaching transition. Auburn is dealing with tons of injuries this year, offensively and defensively. But let's also look at Alabama. They're not having the best year. And, I hear Alabama fans lamenting about 2 losses, and I'm like, oh, woe is you. That's such a terrible thing to go through. But in reality, this is an Alabama team that showed a lot of weaknesses that they haven't seen in quite some time. So when I hear 3-touchdown favorite, I look at it and I say, that's probably right, but it wouldn't surprise me in the least the way that Cadillac Williams has these guys energized, that it's not going down to the wire, even in Tuscaloosa. Now, if this was in Auburn again this year, I'd say throw that 3-touchdown prediction out of the water. Just don't even talk about that prediction. But it's in Tuscaloosa. It's still a Nick Saban coach team, recruited team. I'm trying to be realistic, but my Auburn fandom is really boiling to the top, especially with the way Cadillac's got us all fired up.
Yeah, the two teams from a result standpoint aren't too dissimilar to what we saw last year, although Auburn came in at 6-5 and Alabama was 1 game better. But again, the game was on the Plains, but Auburn should have salted that one away in the last 45 seconds of the game and never made it to overtime and should have pulled off the upset. But here we are in 2022. It's Auburn, it's Alabama, it's the Iron Bowl. It's college football at its best in regards to pure hate, whether that's respectful type of hate, sports context hate, we hope and we believe, We got Kyle Loomis here from E2C Network to help us break it down. You can catch Kyle and the rest of the crew there right here on YouTube, covering everything and all that is Auburn.
I just encourage people on the Iron Bowl, sit back. If you think it's over, don't believe that. And I would say that if it's somehow Auburn got out there and somehow got ahead of Alabama, don't believe that thing's over. Magic happens in the Iron Bowl for both sides, and it'll get pretty crazy, I'm sure. Just it's the way things go in the state of Alabama, and I wouldn't be a part of any other rivalry.
Folks, you see the Twitter handle right there, E2C Network, and you can find it right here on YouTube for all things Auburn. Kyle, we know that you're busy. It's the holidays, so thank you so much for making time and stopping by.
Of course, always a pleasure to join you.